Join me for the reading of God's Word. But as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become sons of God, to those who believe in his name, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. John chapter 1, verse 12 and 13. If you endure chastening, God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom a father does not chasten? But if you are without chastening, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate and not sons. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 7 and 8. For the earnest expectation of the creation eagerly waits for the revealing of the sons of God. Romans chapter 8, verse 19. Therefore purge out the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, since you truly are unleavened. For indeed Christ, our Passover, was sacrificed for us. Therefore let us keep the feast, not with old leaven, nor with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7 and 8. Then came the day of unleavened bread, when the Passover must be killed, and he sent Peter and John, saying, Go and prepare the Passover for us, that we may eat. So they said to him, What do you want us to prepare? Luke 22, verse 7 and 9. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. Matthew 24, 14. Join me in a word of prayer. Father, we want to slow down our very hurried pace of life. We want to come to you at the foot of your cross, reminded indeed, as we just read, that to as many as have received him, that is your Son, Yeshua, the risen Savior, to them you have given the right to become your children. And Father, that is the very reason why we do what we do. That is the reason why Dr. Jeff and myself stand in front of a pulpit and in front of people to speak of your goodness, your love, your mercy, your grace, all of the attributes that represent who you are, but that we, in many occasions, fall short. So we ask you in prayer and supplication that, Lord, that you will pour yourself into each and every one of us, that we may be turned, even if it's 1/10 of a degree, towards the image of your Son, Jesus Christ. For that is your ultimate goal for each and every one of those who are your sons. In Yeshua's name we pray. Amen. Welcome. If you're here for the first time, my name is Manny Fernandez. Sorry for the last name introduction there, but sometimes I think that's actually good to do. So somebody might say, oh, Manny what? You're here at Kingdom Embassy Ministries, and as you already know that I'm going to tell you right after that is the .org if you want to visit our website. If you want to watch the videos and the notes that we so eagerly put up there for everybody's study. I want to read something of a personal nature to you if you don't mind, and just listening for a moment. A long time ago, two very young individuals crossed paths in one of the most unlikely places, a transmission shop. This transmission shop wasn't even located on a main road or highway. It was tucked away enough to make the odds of running into each other that much higher. Be that as it may, a tow truck pulled up with a white car on its flatbed. The big burly tow truck driver jumped out of the driver's door, and out of the passenger side door popped out a blonde-haired, utterly stunning woman who instantly in my spirit I recognized as the woman I would marry. We met 31 years ago and got married 25 years ago today. That would be yesterday, by the way. God has permitted many ups and downs, smooth sailing and rough sailing, bumpy and smooth roads over those years. But that's the beauty of being married to someone who is, as the Bible puts it, your one flesh. When one person hurts, so does the other. When one person thrives, so does the other. When one person is jumping up and down for joy, so does the other. I can't honestly say that my first intentions did not have some other ideas attached. I would be a liar if I didn't admit that. But much sooner than later, the inner beauty of this amazing girl, my baby girl, Jessica Fernandez, quickly overshadowed her outer physical appearance. And that's hard to fathom, being as beautiful as she is. I am so thankful that God gave me you, and I am looking forward to the next milestones. For as many more breaths as I have in me, happy 25th anniversary, my baby girl. So can you just, wait. Say, at the count of three, say happy anniversary. 1, 2, 3. Happy anniversary. Thank you so much for just helping me out with that. This morning, at about 4 o'clock in the morning, I was having an awesome conversation. And if you're wondering with who, it was with myself, by the way. I mean, you have to agree that usually when you talk to yourself is when you get most of the good answers and you have great opinions. Right? You have to agree with that, right? And the thought was something along the lines of like, why are people the way they are? That literally happened this morning. And I was specifically talking about my immediate circle of people that I know that are, I'm going to use loosely, quote unquote, believers. And it was like a bolt of lightning coming from wherever. A question form said, do they know Jesus or do they know about Jesus? And it brought me to two different situations that actually happened. I don't know if it was this week or last week or when it actually happened, and maybe most of you already heard or not. But one of them was about the stabbing of the bishop in Australia. Well, I think he was actually with his head bowed down praying as he was either opening or closing the service. And the other one was about this men's conference where a male stripper was on stage performing at a Christian males conference. And then on top of that, he was actually dancing on a pole, swallowing a sword. This is happening at a Christian men's conference. The pastor that was one of the keynote speakers addressed the matter when it was his turn to come up. He had a lot to say about it. He was not okay with it. But the organizer of the place, of this event, who was his close friend, threw him under the bus and literally told him to get off the stage, you're out of here, as if he was doing something wrong. And I said, what in the world is that about? How does that work? You have one pastor over here who obviously knows Jesus, and you have a pastor over here who knows about Jesus. And the guy who knows about Jesus is doing something that seemingly, in my assessment, humble one, you can tell me later in our discussion time if you think I'm wrong, that somehow, some way he needs to do something to attract people in. As if the Word of God needs any kind of help to bring anybody to listen while they're in their own need. The entertainment style is just going off the charts. And I'm just scratching my head, and what I was thinking about this morning went in that direction. While it started on a personal note, it went in that direction, and I was just telling him a little while ago, Dr. Jeff, I said it has to do with the fact that they don't know how Jesus really felt while he was on the cross. Talking about the way that I felt about people, that I don't realize how he felt on the cross of those who put him up there, his own creation. And so I'm thinking of these two pastors. I'm thinking of this one that's getting stabbed by a jihadist who obviously didn't like the fact of him thinking that he knows Jesus. He doesn't know Jesus. He knows about Jesus, and the one that he knows about is the wrong Jesus. I'm saying all of this to you because times are getting closer and closer and closer. And I want to say to you that if you don't have your ear on the train track, or if you don't have your nose in the grindstone of the Word of God and studying and reading and paying attention to what's going on around us, it's going to catch you by surprise. Don't let that happen. Amen?
Thank you, man. So, good evening. Welcome to the preparation day. Technically it's not, but we're going to talk about the preparation day. We are going to shift away from Romans tonight and take a little time out to prepare for the Passover. Right now, as we stand today, it's Friday. I think it's the 19th of April, 2024, right? Is that the right date? Coming up on Monday night, Monday going into Tuesday is the Passover, and it's time to get prepared. It's very interesting that Manny chose tonight to read something so personal. You know, one of the reasons the Lord then I selected Manny was for what he read you tonight. I've been sharing a Bible study with Manny for over a decade. much over a decade now. It was a decade then, I think. Wow, gosh. And it was who he was as a man and a husband and his character that made me say that's the guy I want to do this with. So the fact that he wanted to read that about his anniversary today is amazing, because what is an anniversary? An anniversary is what we do to remember. To remember. And that's exactly what Passover is. Matter of fact, that's what all the feasts are. And so I'll read you the introduction, and then we're going to go through what it means to be prepared for the Passover. For some of you, this might be the first time you've ever heard anything like this as a Christian. Why is Passover relevant? We'll talk about that. And what does it mean to be prepared both in the natural and even spiritually? Asking questions is one of the most effective ways to engage the mind on a deeper level. Paul and Yeshua, Jesus, used the rabbinic style often, and it has continued to stir the imagination of Christians for 2,000 years. A quick review of Romans, Paul's Magnum Opus, and you will discover that 92 times he asked a question, each used to stitch together the fabric of the greatest theological treatise ever written, the canvas on which was painted the masterpiece of Christian doctrine. Yeshua was a skillful artist when asking provocative questions. Who do men say that I am? Challenged Peter to confess, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And what might be his most alluring question of all is one that Yeshua left blank. The conclusion for you to discover. Who is the faithful and wise servant who the master made ruler over his household, over his estate, to feed the people at the proper time? Blessed is that servant whom upon his return the master finds so doing. And there's one other variation of this teaching style to consider. At times, Yeshua used incendiary statements to inspire critical prophetic inquiries from his disciples or anyone else who had ears to hear. Assuredly, I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon the other that shall not be thrown down. This disturbing image of the crumbling temple later induced his disciples to ask privately, tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? One such directive prompted a question from his disciples that you might ask yourself. And coming from a modern-day Christian makes it even more flammable than his disciples' urgent appeal 2,000 years ago. Go and prepare the Passover for us that we may eat. Their expected reaction, where do you want us to prepare for you to eat the Passover? Now ask yourself the same question. How will I prepare for the Passover that we may eat? So today, we're going to spend our time talking about the preparation for Passover. We're going to talk about what it means to be a son or a legitimate son, what the preparation looks like, and what the end looks like. These are three concepts. What happened was, as I'm flashing back, so we've been doing this 20 plus years. I remember when I first started learning about the Hebrew roots of Christianity and said, oh, we're going to do the feasts. And I knew absolutely nothing. I didn't know what I was doing. And the best I could do was, take a Jewish Haggadah, which is this booklet that they use for the liturgy of the Passover Seder, the meal that they celebrate, and kind of discern what is it that they're doing. And year after year, it was confusing, and I had to go back and study again. And I started realizing, and you'll learn this, those who will be with us on Monday, Haggadah just means the telling. It means the telling. See, the whole point here, we could simplify the whole Passover Seder by saying it's the command to tell the story. And for Judaism, and even for us as Christians, certainly, we're looking back at the history of what took place, and we're remembering, like an anniversary, what happened. So when the children ask, hey, why did this happen? You have an answer. Does that make sense? Yeah. So as time went on, and I started adding more and more prophetic pieces to the puzzle, like, wow, this is more and more significant to Christians than I thought. These Passover Seders got longer and longer and longer. And then one day, many years ago, Stephen Dwayne, who's sitting here, you may hear me mention him. He's always like right there. He's the prophetic grandpa of my life. Could you be my grandfather? Yes, you could be. Mom, at least my father, not my grandfather. That's rude. I forgot how old you are and how old I am. I'm really much older than I admit to. Anyway, he says to me, in Judaism, they have a preparation day. They have, even today, you might notice, Judaism, who considers themselves in exile, in diaspora, they weren't in the land when these laws were trying to be kept. So in Orthodox Judaism, they'll keep Passover 2 days in a row. They don't want to miss the correct day, but one other reason is they prepare. And then he said, that's exactly what Jesus was doing at the Last Supper. And it clicked. I was like, wow. And I was like, next year we should do a separate teaching, nothing to do with the Seder, and we've been doing that ever since. Once we started KM, this is way before KM began, and so what I've been doing year after year since we launched this congregation is that I use the Friday teaching before whenever Passover is to do the preparation teaching, and that's what we're doing today. And there's going to be important things. Now, I've come to the conclusion. I know if you ever want to really have a riot, you should come and visit with me when I'm preparing sermons, because I don't know when to stop. Have you been able to tell that? Like, I just don't know. I go down these rabbit trails, and there's just so much content. There's so many things, and for some reason this year I said, I want to kind of rewind a little. Some of you have never done this before. Some of you are going to listen to this and say, ho hum, this is all basic. But for most people, it's not basic, and so. Even the Passover Seder, I think it's going to be shorter this year. And anyway, I've learned a lot over the years. And so consider the Passover to have three separate teachings. In my mind, there's the preparation teaching, there's the history teaching, and then there's the prophetic teaching. This is the thing that you'll discover. In Judaism, they're set on looking backwards to Passover. Christians should be looking backwards and forwards to Passover. And I think you'll get that. And for me to even say that, it's something that I could have said last year, I didn't, and the last 20 some odd years, and I didn't. But thinking about it this year, and that's the whole point of anniversaries and rehearsals, because every time you do it, it's like, wow, a little sharper, a little more information, it makes a little more sense, and more revelation. That's the whole point. Think of these feasts as meeting times, celebrations. Can you imagine if Manny came home on the night of his anniversary, and his wife is like all dressed, all nice, and there's like a dinner on the table, and he's buzzing around like nothing happened, and they just have a dinner. He never says a word to her about their anniversary, and they go to bed, and she wakes up the next morning, and she's like, and he doesn't have any idea, and like 3 days later, he goes, oh, by the way, honey, happy anniversary. Now, how do you think she's going to feel about that? She's going to think, you missed the appointment. And that's what happens with Christians. Like, God has set appointments in the calendar because there's great revelation that comes, there's great, wonderful, fancy dinners that take place, and we miss them. They go right by us in our calendar. We have no problem remembering 4th of July and Valentine's Day and some other pagan holidays in our schedule. We have no problem remembering those. And the feasts of the Lord come right by us, and they just zip past, and we don't even know they happened. And of course, there's no condemnation in those in Christ Jesus, right? I'm not trying to condemn you for that. I'm saying you're missing out. And I remember when this happened in our family, and I started, I got this revelation that this was for our family, and my children, like Isaiah was 1. He was 1 years old. He's going to be 25 this year. And so my wife and all of our friends, some of them they didn't do such a good job with it. They came into their families with like machetes and hammers, and we're going to do this, and they just try to rip all their traditions apart. I don't recommend you do that. It doesn't really work well. But my wife said, with the great wisdom of a woman, add before you take away. And if you added Passover to your life and your understanding, getting rid of Easter is going to be easy. Because you'll realize there's so much meaning here and there's no meaning there. Right? It's just the reality. Anyway, let's talk about Christians and Passover. Let's connect the dots so you realize that this is not just some fancy thing we might extract out of the Bible for a nice teaching, but let's start off with sonship. Some of this will be repeat. We're in the book of Romans, right? We're taking a pause from the book of Romans. We just came through chapter 8. You want to talk about understanding sonship in your faith as a Christian, chapter 8 of Romans. But this is what, Manny refers to. He loves this. This is one of his favorite passages in the whole Bible. In John 1, starting in verse 11, there's some pieces here that you have to catch. It's about the right to be called a son of God. If you have a relationship with Jesus, a real one, you have the right to be called a son of God. You've gained that right. It only takes that born-again moment with God to have this. No different than in the natural, if you gave birth to a child, a mother and father give birth to a child, that child needs to accomplish nothing but being born to be a child of that family. They don't have to grow up. They don't have to accomplish anything. There's no requirements. It's automatic. Can you see that? That's what this is right here. He came to his own, and his own did not receive him. You know what that means, right? The people of Israel. But as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God, to those who believed in his name, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. We learned about this in a message last week about let's get historical. You realize that the call on your life is not a bloodline call. The inheritance is an inheritance of faith, not bloodline. Paul taught on this in Romans 9, like we talked about last week. It says, that is, those who are children of the flesh, these are not the children of God, but the children of the promise are counted as the seed. And we know from Ephesians 2:8, I can mention this every time I preach. It's so important. For by grace you've been saved through faith. Meaning this inheritance happened through an insertion of what God was doing in your heart with his grace. And then faith came and a confession followed, and that made you a child of God, a child of the promise, not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. That's how you become a child of God. That's how you become a member of the family of God, which is why, as a member of the family of God, the holidays, the festivals, the anniversaries, the appointments of God are relevant for you. Galatians 3, 5 and 7, 5 to 7 and 26 to 29. Listen to what it says. Therefore, he who supplies the Spirit to you and works miracles among you, does he do so by works of law or by hearing of faith? Just as Abraham believed God, and it was accounted to him for righteousness. Therefore know that only those who are of faith are sons of Abraham. So he's talking about you. He's somehow separating here. He's not getting rid of those who are of the bloodline. He's just saying, right now I'm focusing on those that would become what we would call today Christians because of faith, called the sons of Abraham. Now if you're a child of Abraham and you go down that line, but do you know the line? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob renamed Israel. You're in that lineage. You see that? That's why Passover is important. For you are all sons of God through faith in Jesus Christ, for as many as were baptized into Christ have put on Christ. And then this, there's neither Jew nor Greek. See, now it makes perfect sense. See, he divides the line here. He says, by the way, this faith inheritance that makes you a child of Abraham has nothing to do with bloodline. There is neither slave nor free. There is neither male nor female. Of course, we know this male and female, right? Let's not use that verse. Let's not wokeify that at all. For you are all one in Christ, and if you are Christ, then you're Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. And then, we've studied this before. Again, lots of repeats, but important, right? This is a day for us to settle in and connect some dots. You become a child, and you start growing up. Let's go back to our analogy. Parents having a child, right? So little infants, they can get away with almost anything. Lots of accommodations for infants, right? They poop in their diaper, that's okay. They scream and cry when they want something, that's okay. Everything's about me, and that's okay. But that's not okay when you're 10 and 14 and 24. And what happens is if a parent loves that child and they try to be wah, 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 wah when they're 14 and 24, what happens? Discipline. Yeah, there's a slap. Here's where we see that. Ready? It really is an authentication or a legitimation of sonship. A couple of these passages, especially in the beginning of Hebrews 12, we're going to revisit today. And you have forgotten the exhortation which speaks to you as sons. My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you are rebuked by him. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens and scourges every son whom he receives. You see that connection? Those who received, right? From Manny's favorite verse in John 1. If you endure chastening, God deals with you as sons. For what son is there whom a father does not chasten? But if you are without chastening of which you have become partakers, then you are not legitimate sons. See, it's like child abuse. To raise a child. You could ask any young person who might think all the freedom they had when they were young because their parents let them do everything they wanted to do. Like they thought that was cool. When they get older, you know what they think? I wish I would have been restricted. I wish my parents would have stopped me. They don't think, oh cool, I got to do anything I want. Because children, do anything they want. They make terrible choices. They do bad things and hurt themselves. And that a good parent restricts and disciplines children. Furthermore, we have human fathers, and he gives an example. By the way, what human father wouldn't discipline their children, right? For they indeed, for a few days, chasten us to what seems best to them. But he, for our profit, that we may be partakers of his holiness. What does that mean? His difference, his separation. If you can't tell somebody's a Christian within a few moments of meeting them, do they look different in the world? They ought to. Now, no chastening seems to be joyful at present. He doesn't guarantee you'll like it. You won't like it. But painful. Nevertheless, afterwards it yields a peaceable fruit of righteousness to those, here it is, who have been trained by it. Sons are trained. He scourges those he receives. He scourges those he receives. And its legitimacy, you're legitimate when you're being corrected and trained. See, that's the point here. So here you are today, right? That's the whole point of discipleship. It's the whole point of waking up. Over and over again, I encounter people. Okay, so let's just say training is to purify, tutor, until something, right? So if you take the newborn and say, want what I want it now, complain, everything's about me, clothe me, warm me, feed me, comfort me, and then your 12-year-old's going, comfort me, clothe me, feed me. You say, no way, grow up, become a mature person. You start growing up. Now, it's not going to happen automatically. It's because you're training them. We read parenting books when we had little children. One of the lines was, when do you think it's a good time to start turning your child into a good citizen of the family? You think you're going to be able to do that when they're 16 if you haven't started when they were 6 days old? The answer is no. You can't automatically say, by the way, you need to be a contributing member of this family with responsibilities. And they're going to be like, what? Isn't life all about me? See, the whole point is this, prophetically, if we were to stretch it out, the point of Christianity for Christianity is to mature itself until it looks like Jesus, right? the fivefold ministry, apostles, prophets, pastors, evangelists, teachers, for the equipping of the saints, for the work of service, until we all come to a unity of the faith, to the knowledge of the Son of God, to a perfect man, to the fullness and stature and image of Christ, right? Ephesians 4 and 11 on. See, can you see that picture? The ministry of the church. We could break down these ministries. Oh, we got apostles and prophets, we got these things, and the whole point is to build up, edify, build up and mature Christians until they look like Jesus. Words, deeds, and so on. Does that make sense? So then you do that. So now, okay, so what is this? There's the foundation. So you're a child of God. You're a seed of Abraham. So this Passover thing has to be for you some way. Because he says to his children, you remember this. Remember this. So at least we'll start there. You remember this. So now we'll revisit some teachings we had before when we went through Romans 8 recently, is you have to understand that Passover does some things. Some important things, some important features that you need to know about Passover that has to do with sons. Well, you know the story. The story is that the 10th plague was coming along and firstborn sons were going to die unless they put the blood over the doorpost. That was the warning. So we know Passover has to do with sons. And here's what it does. It separates firstborn sons from firstborn sons. Firstborn sons that are true and of God from firstborn sons who aren't. Very simply, all the ones who didn't put the blood over the doorpost, they died that day. The ones who did, lived. It also separates firstborn sons from non-firstborn sons because the non-firstborn sons were never at risk of dying. Does that make sense? Those can be further divided into those who left with Israel on their journey and those who stayed in Egypt. The ones who stayed in Egypt, they died also. They die and go off to, they die by staying in Egypt. They die their natural deaths. And the ones that go with Israel, what? Become part of Israel. Sojourners who are under one government, one law, one people. Everything's equal. It doesn't matter what their bloodline is. So, we might say this. Passover reveals sons. If we stretch it out into the future again, we learn what we learned a few weeks back when we talked about the revealing of the sons of God, right? Here's these stages again. First, it reveals legitimate sons, right? We see chastening. Then, it reveals mature sons. Ephesians 4:13. I love what it says this. Can you like lock onto this? This is the last verses of Hebrews 5, starting in verse 12, into the first verse of Hebrews 6. I want you to see what who wrote this? Apollos. Manny wrote his dissertation on this in Bible college. I'm going with that. Apollos wrote this. He's got reasons for this. I trust him. He says, for though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you again the first principles of the oracles of God, and you have become in the need of milk and not solid food. Now, can you see that analogy there? Milk is for babies. Solid food is for, at least you got teeth. Can you at least be a Christian that has teeth? For everyone who partakes only in milk is, you know what it is though? Here's the analogy. Unskilled in the word of righteousness. He's a babe. But solid food belongs to those with teeth. Those who are full age, that is, who by reason use their senses to exercise and discern both good and evil. Both good and evil. Like the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. See, that's your calling. The problem with Adam and Eve wasn't that God didn't want them to discern good and evil. He didn't want them to do it that way. There was a plan God had for mankind to know good and evil. It wasn't hijack it in the garden and try to fast track. You know, that doesn't go well. That's the end of chapter 5. In chapter 6 it says, therefore, leaving the discussion of elementary principles of Christ, let us go on to perfection. That's the word maturity. That's like leave infancy behind and become a mature adult. And then it lists those things, and it starts to talk about elemental principles, the things that Christianity preaches every week, over and over again, it's the deep things. Hey, he's on fire for God. He understands this and this. It's like, no, that's basic elements of Christianity. He's saying at some point you've got to leave those behind and go on to maturity. So if we could recognize the separation of sons as Passover language, you're going to come into this season with a lot more appreciation for what's going on. You'll come and sit at a Passover Seder. If you can't be with us, we'll film it. It'll be online. You can't taste the lamb, but you can taste everything else. And you'll see how important it is to understand the history, prophetic future, and the prophetic past. Now, you know what else it did? Right there in the passages in Exodus, we know that Passover separated during that time those firstborns, and we can infer that every household of Israel applied the blood and every household of Egypt didn't. All the firstborns in the land of Egypt shall die, but against none of the children of Israel shall a dog move its tongue or wag its tail. Against man or beast, that you may know that Yahweh does make a difference. Holiness, separation between Egyptians and Israel. He's saying Egyptians are going to die, and it won't even be as bad as walking past the dog with his tail wagging that you get whacked with a wagging tail. That's how traumatic it's going to be for Israel. The plague shall not be on Israel. The blood shall be a sign. When you see the blood, I will pass over you. There's where we get Passover from. And the plague shall not be on you to destroy you when I strike the land. That's Exodus 12:13. Every firstborn of Egypt died. It was the end of Egypt's legacy as a significant nation because they're not sons of God. That's what he was saying. At midnight, he struck all the firstborns of the land of Egypt, Exodus 12:9, 12:29, 12:30. There wasn't a household where there wasn't one dead. There's how we know. Everyone was struck, every household. Every firstborn of Israel lived. It was the birth of Israel's legacy as the most significant nation. Consecrate to me your firstborns. They're mine. Exodus 13:1 and 2. Verse 15. That the Lord killed all the firstborns of the land of Egypt, but the firstborns of Israel are my sons. There it is. So son status has to do with Passover. And another phrase that you need to know as you prepare is the end has to do with Passover. Did you see it there? It was the end of one era, the end of one significant nation, and the birth of a new nation. Passover is always the end and the beginning. It ended slavery, it began the wilderness. It ended the wilderness and began the promised land. We learned last in chapter 8 in a teaching called The Unveiling, where we spent an hour and 20 minutes, I think, going through the significance of understanding this revealing of sons, this prophetic picture of a mature church coming into its age of maturity, or an age of accountability, an age where it can produce the result that God wants. All of creation is waiting in eager expectation for the revealing of the sons of God. In Matthew's gospel, Yeshua, Jesus, said it like this: and the gospel of the kingdom will be preached to the world as a witness to the nations, and then the end will come. All through Christendom, throughout history, that's the coming of Jesus. Oh, that's when we'll spread the gospel. People will know who Jesus is, and once every tribe and tongue sees, then he can come back on his cloud, and such and such. But that's not what this means. You could study the actual layout of Matthew chapter 24, and it gives you the layout of the end of the age perfectly. All the things are in perfect alignment and season. They mimic the feast, they mimic the Passover, they mimic the wilderness, they mimic the promised land, and it tells you how to be prepared. Who is the faithful and wise servant who the master would make ruler over his household to give the people food in due season? Pray you are like that servant when I return. The next, I believe, humbly believe, that the next prophetic event on God's calendar, the next prophetic thing in the earth, is going to be this revealing of the sons of God. And we are all, historically and as a people, a church, a one body, have been moving on this spiritual journey from infancy to adulthood. In a sense, it's a prophetic, in Judaism, it's a prophetic bar mitzvah. Where a bar mitzvah is where a Jewish family, essentially the father, as the representative, the head of the family, announces to the world, my son has matured. He's now an adult. And they go through this ritual. It's all symbolic of saying, I now am accountable to God's commandments. No more wah, 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 me. No more of that. You're now an adult. It's the age, the time they do it, that's not what's important. It's the declaration that's important. Maybe I should say to you, in this preparation season, we'll see how this is done. Maybe you're going to say this. It's time for me to be accountable. It's time for me to be a spiritual adult. Creation depends on it because it says creation's waiting to be delivered until this happens. You want to see this picture where I said firstborns, wow, sprinklers in the night. Firstborns, from non-firstborns. Let me read it to you. Philippians 2:9. That at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow, of those in heaven and those on earth and those under the earth, and every tongue should confess that Jesus is Lord. You see it? Heaven, earth, under the earth. That's the prophetic picture of firstborn sons being separated from firstborn sons. And what God is doing is he's saying, oh, there's a sonship, and we learned this last week, that there's a bloodline inheritance and there's a faith inheritance. One is heaven, one is earth, and the rebels are under the earth. You can see that? Heaven and hell is what Christianity has in its standard doctrine, but the Bible teaches heaven and earth and hell. So what about this preparation? I love this. Paul writing in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, right in the beginning, he says, I don't want you to be unaware of something. Now, you know the audience, the initial audience in Corinth are what nationality? Greeks, right? These are Greeks. These aren't Jews. There might be some scattered in there, but he's writing to a Greek congregation, and you know he rebukes them through. They have lots of pagan habits they're coming out of. You know, he evangelized this town. He writes them and he says, moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that all of our fathers were under the cloud. All passed through the sea. All were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. And all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank the spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. You Greek person had a father. You had a relative that was back there in the wilderness, passing around and drinking that water from the rock? Yes. Why? Because your heritage as a seed of Abraham is a heritage of faith, which connects you back to that, your people in the wilderness. That's what adopted you into the family of God. So should we as Christians keep Passover? He addresses this in earlier in that same book, 1 Corinthians 5 and 7. Manny read it in the introduction. Therefore, purge out the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, since you are truly unleavened. For indeed, Christ is our Passover. See, that's important for you to get. Christ is the Passover. You want Christ? You want to celebrate Christ? He's the Passover. Don't you want to be involved with Passover? He's the Passover. Christ, our Passover, was sacrificed for us. Therefore, let us keep the feast. Do you think he's giving us advice to keep the feast? Anyone? Translate that for me in Greek, Aramaic, Hebrew, English. Therefore, let us keep the feast, but not with old leaven, nor with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. 1 Corinthians 5, 7, and 8. So as such, maybe you should be asking yourself this question. How will I prepare for the Passover. Step one, get the leaven out. The symbolism back then was we don't have time to let the bread rise. When God says go, you got to get up and go. You can't be go, well, I got another 2 hours before I can bake my bread. No good. No bueno. Get out and go. No time to let it rise. Symbolism. Do not let sin fester in your life. Remove the leaven from your households. That's what you're practicing this weekend. You're going to go in and you're going to dig through the cupboards and find the crackers that have leaven in them and the bread in the freezer and the various things. And oh boy, if this is your first time doing it, you're going to have such a fun time discovering all the leaven you left in your house and missed. You know, I think I've told this story before where I did this my first year. I thought I was meticulous. I mean, I was, until when I was all done and everything was great and I was like, oh, the leaven's out. And then I hit our ice machine on our refrigerator and breadcrumbs came out. A bag of breadcrumbs had fallen into the ice machine that I couldn't see. You know, it was on the door and literally I hit it and the stuff was spread out. I was like, could this be more symbolic? Rise and go out. The people took their dough before it was leavened. That's what it is. Exodus 12, 31 to 34. Nor shall, here, isn't this a great call for you? Nor shall there be seen leaven among you. Couldn't I say that? There shouldn't be sin in this congregation. There shouldn't be. I was sitting with a gentleman I was working with and discipling the other day, and something came out. We had this conversation about food, and he quickly quoted from 1 Timothy, oh yeah, anything can be sanctified by the word of God and prayer. Just spewing that out as the normal thing that happens. And I'm like, have you ever read the entire passage there? Have you ever just read it? Let's do that together. So we opened the Bible, and there it was right there. Talking about deceiving doctrines of demons. I said, do you think that when Paul writes this to Timothy, he thinks the Torah of Moses is a deceiving doctrine of demons? No, of course not. Well, then that's when he's not talking about that then. So, right? And so we go through this whole thing. And then of course the same pushback is, well, no, Christians you can't obey God's commandments because everybody's going to fall short. Blah, 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 right? The same doctrine that goes on. And I said to him, you don't have to tell me what it is, but you just have to answer this question. Have you sinned today? Can you remember the last time you sinned? And he was like, yeah. You don't have to tell it to me. I just want one thing. Was it voluntary or mandatory that you did that? He's looking at me, and he's like, voluntary. So I said, so you could have volunteered to not do it. Now I want you to go back to your sin before that. Voluntary or mandatory? Think of every sin you've committed this week, this month, the last year. Guess what? All voluntary. Nobody forced you to commit a sin. Well, if it were voluntary, couldn't you volunteer to not do them? You should all be going, yes, Dr. Jeff, yes, go like this. Yes. Yeah, this is the practice, right? Get the leaven out, right? This is the rehearsal. God is teaching us. He gives us rehearsals so we can practice these things. The symbolism is prepare for Passover. Right in the beginning of the Bible, in Genesis 4:7, it says, sin desires to rule over you, but you must rule over it. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. That's what's said in Genesis. Thousands of years later, we're saying, it's got us, ruling us. We got no power over it. That's not the plan of the Bible. I'm sorry. What did Yeshua say about leaven? Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. For there is nothing covered that will not be revealed, and nothing that hidden that will not be known. Right? Luke 12, 1 and 2. And Matthew 6, 6, and 11. Take heed and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees, not the leaven of bread, but of the doctrine of the Pharisees and Sadducees. You see the hypocrisy inside the doctrine. Jesus had no problem with the Torah of Moses. He had a problem with adding stuff to the Torah of Moses, making stuff up, enforcing things that weren't in there. He's correcting that every step of the way. Nope, that's not in there. Who told your disciples they could pick grain on the Sabbath? He should have just said, where does it say you can't do that? Where does it say you can't do that? Oh, your disciples aren't washing their hands. Ooh, where does it say that? Show it to me. That was the problem. They were making stuff up, and then they were persecuting people for not following their rules. Hypocrisy. By the way, what is sin defined as? You know, if you're standard Christian doctrine, right? If I said, what is sin? You would say, sin is missing the mark, right? You've heard that before? Missing the mark? Well, we don't have to make that up because the New Testament defines it. It says, sin is lawlessness. That's what it's defined as, right? In 1 John 3, 4 to 6. Whoever commits sin also commits lawlessness, for sin is lawlessness. Whoever abides in him does not sin. Whoever sins has neither seen him nor known him. Whoever has been born of God does not sin. What? This is New Testament, by the way. Maybe if your Bible doesn't have this in it, you should get a new one. For his seed remains in him and he cannot sin. What? Yep. How about Romans? We studied a few months ago. Therefore, do not sin reign in your mortal bodies. Do not present yourself, members as instruments of righteousness to sin, for sin shall not have dominion over you. Genesis 4:7. You must rule it. It does not rule you. Now, if you're not a Christian, it rules you. You have no shot. What about a little sin? How about just a little itty-bitty sin? What are they called in Catholicism? A venial sin. That's no big deal. A little leaven leavens the whole lump. Galatians 5:9. Hebrews 12:1. Let us lay aside every weight and sin which so easily ensnares us. You see, you're deciding. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying there's not temptation. But why would you put yourself in a circumstance that's inviting sin? Get away from those things. Don't even go near those things. What about one of my favorite verses on sin in the entire Bible? Those of you will recognize this, right? 2 Peter chapter 1 and verse 9. It's the one thing that will stop you from progressing in your faith. The one thing that will stop you on your journey to being like Jesus. To going from newborn Christian to being like Jesus. Forgetting you've been cleansed from your old sins. He goes on and he tells us in the second chapter of the same book, he describes it in more detail. He says, for in after you have escaped the pollutions of the world through the knowledge of the Lord our Savior Jesus Christ, and again entangled in them and overcome. See, that overcome is a phrase. It's not that, oh, I committed a sin after I became a Christian. It's when you get overcome by sin. Like it's taken over your life. That means something. To me, that means you ain't a Christian. That's what it means to me. Doesn't mean you can't become a Christian. It doesn't mean you can't repent and be baptized and become a born-again Christian. But if you're in a constant overcome, sin is constantly overcoming you, what does that say? It just means you're not born again yet because you're not accessing the power of God's grace to overcome. He says, the latter end is worse than the beginning. And then he says, by the way, this is as disgusting 2,000 years ago as it is today. It's like a dog returning to his vomit. What's that picture? Why would he use that analogy? Because dogs eat their vomit. And then like it's disgusting, it's gross. Then they want to come over and lick you. Like, no, get away, don't do that. Right, it's gross. It's a gross thing to return to your vomit. So, let's take a little journey. The Christian journey of preparation. This is going to be like a machine gun. Fast. But it's the upper room discourse. It's everything from John 13 to 17. Right? They ask, hey, where do you want to prepare for the Passover? And then he takes them on a journey. Right? Again, the Jewish telling is concerned about the past. The Christian telling should be concerned about the future. It's interesting that John doesn't say that. All this, let's go prepare for the Passover, comes from the Synoptic Gospels. John just launches into what the preparation looks like. There you are sitting at the table. We're going to go over a timeline. I gave you a handout. I don't usually do that. I want to just quickly run on that in a moment. For those that are watching online, this document is in your notes or attachment there where you can get the notes. It says in John 13, 1 and 2, it was just before the Passover festival, Jesus knew the hour had come. He gets it right. A lot of the other writings say, oh, Passover had come, and and it was the first day of unleavened bread. Like, how could this be going on the first day of unleavened? It's completely bonkers. It's only translations that don't understand the timing of these feasts. You can't be preparing for the Passover on the first day of unleavened bread, because the first day of unleavened bread happens after the Passover. It's completely backwards. So here, before the Passover, and he knew his hour had come, because he's sitting down at this meal that you know as what? The Last Supper. Can I just say this as we go in here so you have a clear understanding? The Last Supper is not the Passover meal. I know that's traditionally taught, but there's so many reasons why it's not. Number one, just go find the Greek word of the bread he breaks. It's leavened bread. It's leavened. It's got air in it. I think it's called artos. It's aired bread. I don't think Jesus is breaking leavened bread on Passover. What do you think? So the evening meal was in progress, and he doesn't really mention this preparation until later, and the preparation is when he's still in the preparation after the meal's over. So we'll get to that. So the first image before we even get there, let me say this. Why is it relevant to you? Because at the end of this discourse that he gives, he prays for people, he prays for his disciples, and he says, by the way, this prayer is for you and for everyone who will believe because of you. So you should raise your hand and say, that's me. That's in John 17:20. All right? I also want you to think of what he says I said we'd go back here a couple of times in Hebrews 12, where he says, let us lay aside every weight of sin that so easily entangles us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross. I had a revelation. I won't do the story this year because it's just long, but the revelation is this. I saw that, and I said, oh, this joy set before him, this is referencing the table. He's sitting at the table, and he's looking down this preparation table at his disciples, and consequently all of us through them. And he's saying, for the joy before him, all of us, he endured the cross. So he knew this is in 13, he knew his hour had come. This is the ultimate preparation. In all three synoptic gospels, do you know what I mean when I say synoptic gospels? Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Very similar format, very similar style of writing, very different than John. So you got three gospels, similar. John's gospel, prophetic, very prophetic. All the gospel accounts, the synoptic gospels, they break bread, they pour wine, they mention the kingdom, and off to the garden they go. There's none of this, chapter 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, you see in John, none of that content is in the other gospels. It's all just in John's gospel. So, he sits down at the table right in the beginning. He washes their feet, right in the beginning, and he says to them after he washes their feet, do you know why I did this? I did this as an example. I'm the master and you're the servant. You're not greater than I am, and look what I did. You should be like this. He starts off with, be Christ-like. Be Christ-like. The betrayer is identified midway through that chapter in 13:18. He gives a new commandment to love like I love in John 13:31 and 35. We get Peter's predicted denial in 13:36. In 14, he says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. In 14:1-6, he says, if you know me, you know my Father. I don't speak on my own authority. John 14:7-11. Greater works you'll do, and anything you ask in my name. John 14:12-14. If you love me, keep my commandments. John 14:15, famous verse. The promised helper, the Spirit, will come. John 14:16-18. If you love me, you'll keep my words, which is really my Father's words, and my Father will love you. That's 19-24, all in chapter 14. The promise of peace, the helper, the Holy Spirit, will teach you all things. Even the ruler of this world comes, who has nothing to do with me. That's the end of the chapter 14. You see, he's giving us a prophetic model. He goes on to 15, abide in me, I'm the true vine. Chapter 15, 9 to 17. Love and joy are perfected. Keeping commandments is how you abide in his love. Greater love has no one than this, lay down your life for a friend. We are now friends. I chose you to glorify my Father by bearing fruit as my disciples. That's the beginning of the chapter. The world hated me, they're going to hate you. John 15, 18 to 25. The Spirit bears witness, you will bear witness. John 15, 26 to 27. John 16, the coming persecution. So you recognize when it comes. First 4 verses. The work of the Holy Spirit. I'm going away, don't be sorrowful. The Spirit's going to convict the world, guide you into all truth. Hear what my Father says and speak it to you. Sorrow will turn to joy, 22 to 23. Whatever you ask in my Father's name, my name, my Father will give you. 16 to 24. Be peaceful and cheerful, even when you have trials, because the Messiah has overcome the world. John 16, 25 to 33. And then the last chapter, the prayers. Yeshua prays for himself, glorify me with the glory I had before the world was. Yeshua for his disciples. I pray for them, not for this world. I've lost none except for the son of perdition. They're not of this world, like I'm not of the world. Sanctify them by the truth. Your word is truth. Yeshua for all believers, starting in verse 20. He prays for those sitting in front of him and all those who will believe because of him, because of them. He prays they will be in perfect, here it is, you ready? Passover preparation. Perfect oneness. Perfect unity. Exactly like he and his Father are one. He's saying, back to the garden. When Adam was born, created, he was created as one being who represented all of God in one body. The picture of unity. Inside of Adam was the woman and the child, but one. That's what me and my Father are, he says. I want them to be like that with each other and in us. Unity. That they will possess the same experience and experience the same love for each other the Father has for the Son. I learned this phrase from Stephen Dwayne. He calls them the kingdom alls. I might have added a few along the years, but it's like this destination. Think of it. This is the Passover destination. All knowledge, all servanthood, all truth, all power, all authority, all love, all obedience, all joy, all peace, all promises, all request, all unity, all perfection, all glory. All of this is where he's saying, look, this is where you're going. Now here's a truth bomb for you. That's what takes place. 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. In chapter 19, they want to take him down off the cross because it's still the preparation day. Well, how could they have eaten the Passover yet if it's still preparation day? And then it says they needed to get him off the cross for a reason, because that day was the Sabbath was coming. All of Christendom, 2,000 years, that must mean crucifixion took place on a Friday. Because we all know the Sabbath is Saturday, yes? Except for John's Gospel says, but that Sabbath was a high day, which is a phrase in Judaism that means feast day. A Sabbath associated with a yearly feast, not a weekly Sabbath. Could it have been the weekly Sabbath? Could they correspond? Of course they could. That year they didn't. And I'll show why. I'll show you why. So what day was the crucifixion? If you're sitting here, by the way, we've been doing this for almost 5 years, and I've never done this before. I've never taken out a piece of paper, a prop. Oh no, I think I took out a cigar cutter once. Talked about circumcision. Having a flashback. My wife wasn't even here, and she's the prop queen when she teaches, so she would have been proud of me that day. If you don't have this, somebody might have copies. Are there any free copies around? If you don't have one, get with somebody that has one. I want to walk you through this very quickly. I'm not going to do it in the notes, so we're going to go way past. I'm going to go all the way towards, right towards the end of the notes. When we finish this, we'll just have a few more minutes left. But I want to walk you through, and this was really inspired as I was studying this year. I was thinking about an evangelical meeting I was at maybe a month and a half ago, and there was this altar call at the end, and the person got up and did this dramatic presentation about the last week. And it was this traditional, makes no sense Christian doctrine. Like Palm Sunday makes no sense. 3 days and 3 nights between Friday and Sunday makes no sense. What you have here makes perfect sense. You know why? Because it comes out of the Bible. Right out of the Bible. We'll do it together. If you go back a chapter into chapter 12 of John, in the first verse, it tells us that it's the moment he's being anointed in Bethany. And it tells us it's 6 days before Passover. So we know it's 6 days before Passover. How do we know that? Because it says it right there in that Bible verse, 6 days before Passover. In the 12th verse of the same chapter, it says, and then he made his triumphal entry the next day, which must mean 5 days before Passover. Yes, master at math I am. And by the way, we can know what date this is because we know what day on the calendar Passover is. It's the same day every year. It's the 14th of the first month going into the 15th. So if we count backwards, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 6 days before is the 8th. Then there's the 9th. And then he's announced as the Lamb, or the King, so to speak. And that leaves 4 days. And you know what the Bible says? The Lamb has to be examined for 4 days. It says that in the Lamb is selected for the Passover on Nisan 10. The 10th of the month, that's exactly where we are here this week. Nisan 10. That you can find in Exodus 12:3. And interestingly, in Judaism, they kind of examined the lamb for 4 days. It's hidden away. The last verse of John 12 says, Jesus was taken from them and hidden. See, he's the Passover lamb. So by the way, what days of the week are these? Well, the 6th is a Thursday. The 8th is a Thursday. The 9th is a Friday. That means Palm Sunday has now become Palm Friday. From now on, forever in your life, Palm Sunday is Palm Friday. We're using our current days. And then what takes place all the way on the 13th, which is the day before Passover, right? Yes? Because the 14th is Passover, in between the evenings, as it's becoming the 15th. The Last Supper takes place, the stuff we just read about. It all takes place right before the sun goes down. Like this whole meal we just said, everything we just described is before the sun goes down, because when the sun goes down, he leaves and goes to the Garden of Gethsemane. And he prays, oh Lord, take this cup from me, blah, blah, blah. Rebukes his disciples for not staying awake. You know that scene? And then he gets betrayed. And then he goes to an overnight trial, a kangaroo court in the Sanhedrin. And then in the morning, early morning, he's in the trial in front of Pontius Pilate. This is as the 13th becomes the 14th. Now we're in the morning of the 14th. That night, when the sun goes down, in between the evenings, is the Passover. But he's on the cross at 9 a.m. in the morning. And darkness comes over the land at noon, and he's dead at 3. And then they come to him in that verse I just read you in John 19 and say, we got to get him off the cross before the sun sets because the Sabbath is approaching. Now what Sabbath is this? The first day of unleavened bread, which happens after the sun sets, as we're eating our Passover meal, is a Sabbath according to the Bible. And they don't want the body on the cross during that time, so they got to take him down and stick him in the grave. And he's buried before sundown. He's put in the tomb before sundown on the 14th. Yeshua could not be eating the Passover meal on the 13th because he was the Passover meal on the 14th. Then you start counting. That night, as soon as the sun goes down, it's the first night. The next day, when you wake up, it's the first day. Then you have the second day and the second night. The second night and the second day, and the third night and the third day, which arrives us right at sundown, right before sundown on a Saturday. Because he goes into the grave on a Wednesday, and at Saturday night before sundown, he resurrects. No sunrise service. That comes from paganism. They showed up at sunrise, and he wasn't there. That's all we know. But we do know, if you have a math formula with only one variable, it's easy to figure it out. Ready? We know exactly what time he went in the grave because he went in before sundown in April in Jerusalem, which is around before 7 o'clock in the evening, which means he got up before 7 o'clock in the evening 3 days and 3 nights later, because that's what the formula says, which is right before 7 o'clock on Saturday. Then the sun goes down, and guess what? It's the Feast of First Fruits, where he presents the first fruits offering to the Father, where they come out to the grave and they want to touch him, and he says what? Don't touch me, I have not yet ascended to my Father in heaven, to present the first fruits offering, which are who? All those who came out of the grave when he resurrected. The first fruits offering. The picture is perfect and right in the Bible. All this other stuff you've been living with for 2,000 years is the man-made tradition, not true. No wonder why people that don't believe say, how do you get 3 days and 3 nights between Friday night and Sunday morning? It doesn't matter, it's just whatever. What does the day matter? Well, the day matters because it says in the Bible, it tells us exactly the day. As a matter of fact, the 3 days and 3 nights warning is to a wicked generation. Yikes. Yikes. Why is it important to rehearse these things? You might be looking at that thing, this is confusing. Well, not if you do it next year, and the next year, and the next year, and the next year, and you keep rehearsing it until it makes sense to you. And then when your friend says, why do you got 3 days a night? Well, let me tell you, started in John 12. Then you can do it John 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. You can take Matthew, you can take Mark, you know the time he died, you know the time he went into the grave. It's all right there in the Bible. Just put all the pieces together. It's right there. And now I made it easy for you. It's on a piece of paper in front of you. Okay, we have to turn home so we can get done. I know it's a little long, it's the preparation. But we have to talk a little bit about the end. Because that's what's really important for us. The rehearsal is amazing. We're going to have a fun time on Monday. We're going to eat lots of food. We're going to have lots of people. It's going to be crazy. Pray for my neighbors, because there's going to be cars lined up down and around and everywhere. And it's going to be amazing. But the bigger picture is, what's our job description? What should we be doing? How do we accomplish this thing in the earth? This gospel of the kingdom. I learned this from Stephen Duane long ago when he showed me that the picture of the gospel of the kingdom is sitting right there in Isaiah 40. Let me read you the piece from there, starting in verse 1. Comfort, yes, comfort my people, says your God. Speak comfort to Jerusalem and cry out to her that your warfare, your hard labor, your Romans creation is being still in bondage, is ended. The voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare a way for the Lord. John the Baptist, right? Elijah. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God. That's the message of Elijah, right? In Malachi 4, we'll see in a moment. The glory of the Lord shall be revealed. Romans 8 again. He's connecting these dots. Behold, the Lord God shall come with a strong hand. We'll see that again in Malachi 4. Who has directed the Spirit of the Lord, or who has been his counselor. You've seen this verse. You just don't always know where it came from, but it's in the New Testament. With whom will he take counsel, and who will he instruct, and taught him in the path of justice? Who has taught him knowledge and showed him the way of understanding? That's exactly what Paul quotes in 1 Corinthians 2, when he says, who will know the mind of the Lord to instruct him? And then he answers it. Say it with me. We have the mind of Christ. He asks the question that's been asked for generations through the prophets, and then he tells you how it happens. Think this way. I am called to think like God. Amen. That's what he's saying. I don't think you get a better description of the gospel of the kingdom. It's everything God wants as he manifests his government into the earth, and our role in bringing the kingdom to earth. I can't do it today for time's sake. It's a teaching unto itself. But if you just read 1 Corinthians chapter 2, first 5 verses, gospel of salvation, next 11 verses, gospel of the kingdom, perfect description in 16 verses, just see what goes on there. The gospel of salvation is a simple message. It's what makes sons. It's what gets sons received. It's like a birth. The child had nothing to do with it. The gospel of the kingdom is like becoming an adult. It's maturity, it's deep things, it's mysteries. Things were created for our glory. All that's there in the next 11 verses. Culminating in this one thing. Think like God. It's the gospel of maturity, perfection, discipleship, government of heaven, mysteries, fullness and stature and image of Christ, joint heirship. It's the gospel of revealing sons. It's the gospel of the restoration. It's the gospel of the kingdom. And when it's preached to the whole world, shouldn't we define it? Then the end can come. Then the final Passover can come. That's how the restoration of all things happens. That's what Peter was talking about. In Acts chapter 3, it says, repent therefore and be converted, so that your sins may be blotted out, so the times of refreshing may come from the presence of the Lord, and that he may send Jesus. Well, Jesus, he's already gone. He came and left. Why is he saying send Jesus? Because he's talking about the second coming. That he may send Jesus, who was preached to you before, but he can't come yet, whom heaven must receive until the restoration of all things. So he can't come until the restoration of all things, which means the restoration of all things is the job of someone else. Raise your hand. Say, that's me. But this man, that was Acts 3:17 and on. But this man, after he had offered one sacrifice for sin, sat down at the right hand of God, from that time waiting until his enemies are made his footstool. Whose job is that? Your job. That's Hebrews 10-13, quoting Psalms 110, 1 and 2. We said this already. All of creation is waiting for this to happen, for this sonship, right? It's Passover, revealing of sons. Passover language. Can you see it? We'll finish in this vein here. Just a few more things. Peter, obedient to the Lord, in 2 Peter chapter 1, towards the end, he talks about a voice that he heard from heaven. He's testifying to something he saw. It's the thing he saw on the mountain, the Mount of Transfiguration, in Matthew 17, when Jesus transfigured into a ball of light, an energy, a body of light. Moses and Elijah appear with him. Peter, James, and John are there witnessing it. It's an amazing moment. And when they come down from the mountain, they ask him a question. They say, why do the scribes say Elijah must come first? And Jesus tells them, Elijah is going to come to restore all things. And by the way, this John the Baptist came as a precursor. He was kind of like the image of Elijah. We know later, we could just go back. How do we know it's John the Baptist? Because it was prophesied over his life in Luke 1 and 2. It was prophesied. It was said he would come in the spirit of Elijah. He would come to prepare a way. So it's talking about Elijah. They knew it. They said, why does he have to come first? He says he comes to restore all things. Then he says, don't tell anybody about this. Can you imagine? Hey guys, we were up on the mountain. Jesus turned to a ball of light and Moses and Elijah appeared. And they'd be like, okay, guys, you've lost it. So he says, don't tell anybody about this until the resurrection, until I'm gone and resurrected. And he does in 2 Peter. Is when he's telling the story. He's actually telling people what happened. But the important thing is here is that this thing was spoken about by the prophets. And that's the thing. How would you know? If we just let today come and go, if we didn't take the time out this year and again next year and again the following year to kind of drill it down into your head, that's what this is about, that's what we're rehearsing, right? If you just want to make your resurrection experience with Jesus, Easter bunnies and chocolate and egg hunts, Lord help us. If you want that to be your experience, then none of this is going to get drilled into your head. It's not going to make a difference to you. But when the prophet speaks, when they say, this is what was spoken about by the prophet, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare a way for the Lord. Prepare a way for the Lord. Prepare for the Passover lamb. They asked John, I mean, you know John's character, right? We don't know exactly what he looked like, but you could kind of picture it, right? Wild, crazy, little like my friend Jay Etzel. Just wild, dressed in all sorts of crazy clothes, eating locusts and honey, coming out of the wilderness, baptizing people in the Jordan, a real radical. And they say, by the way, are you Elijah? He's like, no, nope. Are you the prophet? I don't know what you're talking about. I just know this. I'm the voice of one crying in the wilderness. Sorry, John, that is Elijah's ministry. Like, I don't know. Maybe it's like he knows. Remember in John 3, it says, 3:30, I think it is, it says, he must increase and I must decrease. Like he knows he's toast. Like if he's really the Messiah, I'm really done. So he's like questioning this. Anyway, he has that experience. But here's where it all comes in. This is where we'll end today. Why it's so important. And we can arrive here lots of different ways, lots of different teachings wind up here. It's so important. It's something I could teach over and over again. I sometimes sit with my children, I do discipleship and they hear, especially my son Isaiah says, I've heard that before. You've said that before. We've heard all that before. Well, how many times? You're going to read the Bible once? You gotta drill it down over and over again. The stuff is complicated. But you wind up in this place from lots of different directions. You just wind up here. And what it is the last words of the Old Testament. It's telling us what to look forward to. Are you preparing for this? Right? Are you just like doing your own thing, not caring what's going on in the world? Like, what is this to you? And this is what it says. And if you could picture everything we just said, leaning towards this ministry of Elijah, the picture on the mountain with Moses and Elijah. I often kid, I say, how did they know it was Moses and Elijah? Because they knew this passage. That's why they asked the question. They knew to ask this question. They're just fishermen, by the way. Peter, James, and John, they were just fishermen. Their profession was fishermen, not scholars. They weren't Torah scholars, but they knew this. It says this, last 3 verses of the Old Testament. Number 1, remember the laws of Moses, my servant, which I commanded him in Horeb, for all of Israel, with the statutes and judgments. There's Moses. Behold, I send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord, and he will turn hearts of the father to the children, and hearts of the children to the fathers, lest I come and strike the earth with a curse. This is everything you're preparing for. This is the ministry of the end of the age. If you go back to the first verse, it's behold, I come burning like a fire. This is not the first coming of Jesus that this is talking about. It's the second coming. And you are preparing a way in the ministry of Elijah. And you know what the Jews do? The Jews who don't know Jesus, all over the world, what they're going to do Monday, when they sit down at their Seder tables, there's going to be an empty chair set for Elijah because they know Elijah must come first. They know it. Christians don't know it. Behold, I send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. And his ministry, restore hearts, restore families, bring the earth back to the image of God, man, woman, marriage, child, unless the curse over creation remains. People, that's your job. Every single day from this day forward, your job is to prepare for that ministry. Amen? Father, we thank you so much for today. Just be blessed. Pray your word would go forward and not return void. And your people will be transformed by it in the mighty name of Yeshua. We'll see you next time.